Hi there. We are in Revelation 12 this week, and this is one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible, and certainly in the book of Revelation, because it explains so much that is otherwise a mystery in this world. There's so much brokenness and pain and violence and just bad things that happen, and it leads us a lot of times to ask why. What is wrong with this world? Well, this chapter kind of pulls back the veil a little bit and gives us some insight on why there is so much going wrong in the world. Because there's an enemy. There's a real enemy who is opposed to God's purposes and God's people. And so he is at war with God's people. It says that in this very last verse of chapter 12, it says that the enemy knows he lost the battle with Jesus as Jesus conquered him through his death and his victorious resurrection. He ascended into heaven where he is on the throne. And the enemy knows the only way he can try to hurt Jesus is to try to hurt his people. And so it says he is making war with God's people. That explains a lot, really. In fact, that metaphor of war is all through the Bible. In fact, it dawned on me recently, there's only 4 chapters where the war is not raging in the whole Bible. The first 2, before the fall, before sin entered God's perfect creation, and the last 2, which describe the renewal of all things and the earth made new, and what was lost, Eden lost, is now Eden restored in the last 2 chapters. So all in between, there's this metaphor of war. And it's important to understand that as individuals and collectively as churches. I had a couple different groups of pastors that came to Grace Place last week for a tour and for some training and for a seminar. So I did a couple different talks, and one of the things that I pointed out was this reality of war and how we've got to, as individuals and as a church, keep this in mind if we're going to be effective in terms of God's kingdom and God's purposes. And so I want you to think about that for a minute as you get ready for your discussion. And Jesus gave us a mission as Christ followers. He said, I want you to be my witness in all the world. And specifically in Matthew 24:14, he said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. That is an assignment that we've been given that is unfinished still. And so it ought to be motivating for us, if we're followers of Jesus, that we would take this gospel of the kingdom to the world. It's not just the gospel of salvation, although it is that. It's more than that. It's about a revolution. And the end does not come until we finish the assignment, which is still unfinished. You notice I just said revolution. We usually don't think about church and the business of Christ with that kind of a term, maybe. But really, if you go back and read what Jesus told the disciples to do and then what they did throughout the book of Acts, it was a revolution. It was radical. No wonder the early disciples were criticized and, in fact, accused of turning the world upside down. That's how radical it was. No wonder those who were selling idols wanted them arrested or killed because they were losing business when the Christ followers came to town. No wonder they were hunted and persecuted and brought before authorities, and many of them were martyred. They were leading a revolution, and that was a threat politically to the government. The revolution, it just swept across the Roman Empire like a raging forest fire. Changed people, changing the world. And that aggressive expansion of the church really altered the history of the world. It spread across the Middle East, it spread across East Asia, North Africa, Europe, in just a few years. It was unbelievable. It was like a raging forest fire. And then the next generation and the next generation continued the revolution. But sadly, that energy and momentum and passion and vision has faded a lot, at least in Western countries today, like our country. Richard Stearns wrote a thought-provoking book called Unfinished. Not It Is Finished. That's what Jesus said on the cross. But he wrote a book, Unfinished, to talk about how our mission that Jesus gave us is still unfinished. And in that book, he says this, quote, Many of our churches are no longer the boot camps established to equip us for battle. They're spiritual spas designed to enhance our well-being and give us a glow at the beginning of our week. That's a sobering thought if that's true, and I think it is true, and it's not okay. Why would we dumb down the Great Gospel Commission? Why would we substitute the Great Gospel Omission and not fulfill this assignment that we've been given to take the gospel to the world? So before you just get into your discussion and try to think about how this applies to you individually when you think of warfare, spiritual warfare, a real enemy, and how you see evidence of that in your life or your family or your work, think about the church. You might be a member of Grace Place, you might be a member of another church, you might not be involved in church at all. That's okay. But for those of you who are, I would encourage you to think of church as a military outpost. Because we are not members of a country club where we just go to relax when it's convenient. We are not a dinner theater where you might go for a date and entertainment once in a while. We're not a school where you come just for education. We're not a weekly TED Talk gathering where you just get some tips for success or happiness. We're not a religious retreat where you come to perform certain rituals to make you feel okay with God. We're not a hospital for sick people. Think of this. A healthy church is a military outpost. There are members, soldiers. There is education, boot camp. We have worship services that are preparation and motivation for battle. We have, in a sense, medics, or a MASH unit, which stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. But the purpose of a MASH unit is to get wounded warriors healthy and back into the battle, not long-term residential care. And so, because there is an enemy who is on a mission to be at war with God's people, and as Jesus said, his desire is to kill, steal, and destroy. Because that is true, God is looking for individuals who will have the same passion and zeal as those first believers in the book of Acts that we read about, who see themselves as kingdom warriors who are called to get engaged in this battle for souls that is real, that is happening every day all around us, and to organize ourselves, to strategize, to be willing to take risks, to have courage, and to go behind enemy scenes to enemy lines to free hostages for Jesus. Jesus told us that the harvest is ripe, and he wants us to see the world around us through his eyes so that we can see that there are a lot of people who haven't yet heard the gospel and need to. And so he's asking us to engage in this warfare that is real and that is ongoing until finally it gets brought to an end, as we'll see when we get to the end of Revelation. I hope you have a good study. God bless you.